Okay, what's up, everybody? We're back, and today we're going to be making an interaction system. So let me jump in and show you what we're going to be making. This is working from a line trace. So when we walk up to an item, our line trace hits it. We'll highlight the item when we're looking at it, unhighlight it when we look away. We also have a little widget that'll pop on. So this says press E to spin cube. So E is my interact button. So we're going to be setting up an interact and a pickup button. So if I walk up and interact with this, I can just set it spinning, and same thing with that. We're just interacting with those. And then I have this little thing that I'm using in a future video here. I can press E to place cube. So if I just press E, we're interacting with this object and we're just placing cubes. And then we have some smaller stuff we can pick up. So that says F to collect trophy. So F is my pickup key, but you can see that we're highlighting the items, our widgets coming up. These cubes here we can pick up, so they say press F to pick up. So every item can have something different that it says, and whatever you want to do can be different too. So these cubes I can pick up, collect them, put them in inventory, whatever we want to do. Or if we don't want to pick up, we can interact with things. So that's what we're going to be building. So I'm going to jump into a new project and we'll start it over here. Okay, so I'm in a brand new first-person template project. I've deleted all the stuff inside here because we don't need it. Just gives us a little bit more space. So this interact system is going to be a little bit of a mashup between a few different things that I've seen while doing this. But when I started out, I definitely needed an interaction system, a way to interact with items in the world. So this is just how I like setting it up. This is my go-to interaction, the way that I like doing it for whatever projects I'm doing. So let's jump in and we'll get it going here. So I'm going to go into the content folder. I've made a folder in here called My Stuff, and I'm just going to make a new folder inside that and call it Interact. And we're going to be making a component out of this. So I'm going to throw everything with this interact in that folder here. So we're just going to go and put our stuff in here. I'm going to go to Blueprint and we're going to add a actor component. And I'm going to call this AC Interact. And then we're going to need a actor in here. This is going to be our parent blueprint for whatever interactable item we have. So I'm just going to call this BP base interact. And then we're going to need a interface. So I'm going to go to Blueprint, Blueprint Interface, name this BPI Interact. We're going to need a material for our highlight material. So I'll just call this Highlight Material. And we're going to need a widget. So I'm going to go to User Interface, Widget Blueprint, User Widget. Call this WBP for Widget Blueprint Interact. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the widget first, and we're going to just do a search for text up here. Now, I'm just going to make this a very basic, plain widget. You can do whatever you want. You may not even want the widget, but I'm going to throw a widget in here. So by default, comes up to fill screen. I'm going to go up here, change that to desired on screen. I'm also going to take it off of bold and just put it regular. And I want to add just one black outline to it, just so I have white text with a black outline. You can do whatever you want with yours, but that's just pretty much how I'm going to set mine up. I'm going to check the center alignment here. And then this is important. Make sure you check is variable up here. And I'm going to rename this to my interact text. We will have to get this from the widget, so just remember what you name that. You can always jump back in here if you need to. So I'm going to compile, save that. I'll leave all these windows open in case we got to come back in. So now I'm going to go into the material, select the root node and change it to translucent. And then I'm going to go to base color here. I have this swatch right here I'm going to pick. If you don't have that, if you're on an older version of Unreal, just drag off, press 3, and you can get your color that way. I'm just going to select the swatch here. I'm just going to do white. Again, you can pick whatever color you want. And I'm going to change opacity to 0.2 because that's just what I like. But you can add a color to this if you want a tint and set your opacity to whatever you want. But 0.2 works good. I'm going to apply it, save it, go back to our folder and open up the interface now. So this is the interface we just made. We're going to add a couple functions in here. This first function I'm going to call highlight, and I'm going to come down here and put an input on it. And that input is going to be can interact. And I'm going to leave it as a Boolean. And then I'm going to add another function saying interact pressed. And then one more function for pickup pressed. And then we're done in here. We can compile, save that, back to our folder. I'm going to set up the base item after, so we can jump into the component and start building this now. So I'm going to make a function in here and just call this line trace. And before I forget, I'm going to just go to the event graph and we're going to come off begin play and do a set timer by function name. And then I'm just going to type the name of that function we just made in. So line trace. And I'm going to set this to 0.1. You can change this if you want, but 0.1 works really good for this interaction. I'm going to make sure to check looping because I want this to keep happening. So now when this fires up, our line trace is going to start. So now I'm going to go into the line trace. And the first thing we want to do is get our line trace by channel. So we're going to pick by channel. And then we need a start and an end for this. So I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to get camera manager, drag off that, get camera rotation, drag off that, get camera location. And then I'm going to drag off the get camera rotation and get forward vector. And then just kind of clean this up a little bit and get a little bit of room over here. Then I'm going to drag off the forward vector and do a multiply. I'm going to drag off the camera location and do an add. And then I'm going to plug my multiply into my add. I'm going to go to the second vector pin on the multiply here, right click and do to integer. And then I'm going to promote that to a variable. That's going to be the distance of our line trace. So I'm going to just rename that distance. And I'm going to compile, save it so I can set the default in that. And I'm going to do 250 because that works good usually for when I'm testing it. Okay, so we have all this now. I'm going to move it closer. The get camera location is going to go into the start. And then this addition, the return from that is going to go into the end. And then I'm going to just grab these nodes here and collapse just to keep it cleaner, get them out of the way a little bit. Now I do want to test this, so I'm going to go for duration and put a return node coming out. And then one thing I want to do is just make a custom trace channel for this. So I'm going to go to project settings, go into collision. Trace channels will be on the bottom. I'm going to add a new trace channel and just call it interact. And by default, I want to set it to ignore because I want this to ignore everything. And then I want to manually put certain items onto that. So now I can go back into my line trace here. I'm going to recompile so it shows up, hit this little drop down, and there's the interact line trace channel that we just made. So now with that done, I'm going to go into the first person character. We're going to add this component to the player. So I'm going to just search for a component called AC interact, and it comes up right there. So now our component is on our player, and you can see we have our distance. We can adjust that here too, our line trace distance. So I just want to make sure that this is working. So I'm going to jump in real quick, and we can see we have our line trace. And we can actually do Shift F1 and then eject. And that will show exactly where it's coming from. So that would be coming right from my camera, 250 units in front of me. So I'm good there. Going to go back into the component, turn off the debug because we don't want that anymore. We can set that back to none. Make sure ignore self is checked. And then we can start building this out. So I'm going to disconnect that return, just put that over there. I'm going to come off this pin and we're going to do two branches. So I'm going to put a branch, come off true, and put another branch. Connect this return of the line trace up to our first branch. That's going to be if we hit something. So that return value is if our line trace hit something, true or false. Then if it did, we're going to handle it here. So we're going to come off the out hit and break that, and then open this up. And I'm going to come off the hit actor, and we're actually going to promote that to a variable. So I'm going to right click, promote to variable. That will give us our variable. Drag off and do an equals. So we're going to have to do that too. And then we can close that. We don't need it. I'm going to delete this variable here because we have it saved right here. So we don't need that one for now anyway. Just going to move that to the bottom pin there, plug this condition in. So now I'm going to grab this hit actor variable we made and plug it into our equals. I'm going to kind of go fast just making this, and then I'll explain what it's doing after, just so we can get through a little quicker. So coming off a true, we just have to return out. You'll see why at the end here, but we're just going to return out. Coming off the false, we're going to do a is valid, and we're going to do the one with the question mark here. And then I'm going to get this hit actor, and we're going to feed that into the input here. So if this is valid, we're going to come off here and we're going to call our highlight interface. So make sure you pick the one with message, and we're going to make sure that can interact is not checked. And the target for that is going to be this variable here. So I'm just going to do a little reroute, clean it up. And now after we call this interface, we're going to get this hit actor and we're going to set it here. So we're going to just drop it on that pin. We're going to set it right there. And then what we're going to set it from is this line trace here. So I'm going to drag this line trace over, plug that in there, and just straighten it up. And then after we do that, we're going to need this highlight interface again. So I'm just going to copy and paste that there. We're going to make sure that this one is checked, and we're going to drag our variable return over as the target, and then we can return out. And if this is not valid, all we're going to do is bypass this unhighlight function. So I'm just going to put a couple reroute nodes, plug that in like that, and we're good to go there. Now, if our line trace doesn't hit anything, we're going to come out of false. I'm going to copy this variable is valid, the interface, and that variable there. So we're just going to copy that, paste that down here, plug that into the false. So now if our line trace doesn't hit anything, we're going to come down here. We're going to see if this is valid. If that is valid, we want to call unhighlight on it. So we're going to do that. We want to make sure unhighlight is not checked. Then we're going to set our hit actor, but this time we're not going to set anything to it. We're just going to set it to null. So it's not going to have anything plugged in. That's going to remove the reference. And we're going to return. So I'm just going to copy this return node, plug that in here. And I'm also going to put a return node right here. So if this variable is not valid, we're just going to return out. So basically what we're doing is when we look at an item, we're going to store it in that variable, and we're going to send the highlight interface out to it, which is going to apply our overlay material and the widget. So if our line trace hits something, we're going to check, is our hit actor, or whatever is stored in that variable, is it the same thing as what our line trace is hitting? If it is, then that means we're just looking at the same item we're highlighting, so we're just returning out and we're not doing any of this. If it's not equal to that, then it's either going to be valid or not valid. So if there's not a valid hit actor in there, that means that's an empty variable. So if it's not valid, we want to set that variable to whatever our line trace is looking at, and then call our highlight function on that actor now, and then return out. And then if we don't hit anything, we again want to check, is that valid or not? If it's valid, we want to call unhighlight on it, remove the reference, and then return out. So now it'll become not valid. So most of the time, this line trace is just going to be coming out and returning. It's not going to be doing anything. It's just going to be coming out, returning. So we're only going to fire our interface one time when we highlight it, and then one time when we unhighlight it. But that's going to be our interact code. So I'm going to compile and save that. So now let's jump into our folder, because we have to add a couple input actions on our player. So we're going to go into first person input, or wherever your input actions are. Right click, go to input, input action, and I'm going to name one IA underscore interact, and then I'm just going to control D on that to duplicate it. And I'm going to name this one pickup. And then I'm going to go into the data asset for it. This is what holds the mappings, and I'm going to add a new mapping and look for interact, and then hit the drop down, hit the keyboard. My interact key I want to be E, so I'm just going to hit E, add a new mapping, pick our pickup, hit the drop down, hit the keyboard. I'm going to use F. You can use whatever keys you want here, and save it. We can close that. I'm going to save the project and then jump into the player. So now I'm inside the first person character here. I'm going to right click and look for those input actions. So I'm going to type in IA interact, and you'll see enhanced action event right here. That's what we just made. And we'll open that up. Right click, look for IA pickup, and you'll see that enhanced action here. So we're going to open that up, and then coming off the started, I'm going to do a is valid and pick the one with the question mark. And then I'm going to just copy that is valid and put it down here, come off of started. Then we can close these up. Now this top one is my interact, so I'm going to drag off here and look for my interact rest that we made. This is the interface function we made. So I'm going to look for interact pressed, and then I'm going to do the same thing for my pickup. I'm going to drag off here and look for pickup pressed, and you want the one with message. If it comes up with other ones, you want the one that says message. So now I can grab this interact component here that we put on our character, drag that in. We can drag off and get hit actor, and this will get that variable. And then I'm just going to drag off here, press R for a reroute node, plug that into our isValids, R for a reroute node, plug that into our interfaces, and straighten everything up here. So now we are all done inside the player. We're going to compile and save that. And now we can set up this BP base interact item here. What I'm going to do is add a static mesh in here. So this is going to be the parent to whatever items we're going to make to interact with. I'm going to go to the collision settings, and you can see by default it's set to block all, but because I made my line trace set to ignore everything, it's not going to get picked up here. So we have to change that. So I'm going to go into custom, and I'm just going to make sure collision is enabled. I'm going to set ignore all to everything. I just want this to block interact and pawn. You'll be able to change this for each item. So this is just the default collision settings that you want. That's all I'm going to do in here. Then I'm going to add another component, and we're going to add a widget. I'm going to select that widget, scroll all the way up, and under user interface where it says space, I'm going to change it from world to screen, and then I'm going to go to widget class, and I'm going to pick the widget I made, which I think was WBP interact. And then I'm going to scroll down, look for the visibility. And I want to turn visibility off because by default, I don't want this widget to be visible. I want to turn it on when I highlight it. So now I can go into the event graph. I'm going to cast to this widget, and this is one of the times when casting is fine to use. This widget is permanently going to be inside of the interactable item. So when the interactable item is loaded, the widget's going to be loaded. So we're going to cast to it so we can change the text inside of it or anything else we want to do with the widget. So I'm going to drag that widget component out, and we have to get user widget object from it. And then we can drag off that and do a cast to WBP, and there's the interact widget. And then I'm going to right click on this pin here and promote that to a variable. So we have this stored. And then we're going to add this base interact item to our interface that we made. So I'm going to go to class settings, implemented interfaces, go to add and look for interact, and we should see BPI interact. And now this blueprint is on that interface, and any child we make is also going to be on that interface. So now we can see that we have the interface tab here and we have the functions we made. So I'm going to double click the highlight function, and I'm going to promote can interact to a variable. We're not going to use that right now, but in some of the items we make, we will use it. So I'm just going to come off there and just do a branch and then connect up the return to the condition there. So now I'm going to grab the static mesh, throw that in, drag off and do a set overlay material. And we're going to need 2 of them. So I'm going to copy and paste. Plug in your static mesh to both targets. And we're going to plug true into one, false into the other. And we're going to pick the highlight material we made. So I'm just going to look for my highlight material, put that into the top one, leave the bottom one blank. Now the reference we got from the widget from the cast, we're going to drag that out. And then now we have to look for the text that we named inside there. So inside the widget, whatever you named your text, I named mine interact text. And actually, while I'm in here, I just want to remove this text because I don't want that to say anything. So I'm just going to go up here and just delete that. We're going to change it dynamically for everything, so it doesn't matter anyway. I just like leaving them blank if I'm changing them dynamically. So whatever you name that text, so we're going to drag off and get interact text. And then now we can drag off that and do a set text. And we're going to pick the text here where it says set text text. And we're going to plug that in. And then we're going to grab the widget component, drag off of that and do set visibility. And we're going to need 2 of these. So I'm going to copy and paste that, plug that in. I'm Make sure your widget is plugged into the target. I'm going to make sure that visible is checked on the top one and not visible for the bottom one. When we fire highlight, can interact is true. We're putting our highlight material on, we're setting our text, and we're making the widget visible. When can interact is false, we're taking the overlay material off and making the widget not visible. So one more thing I want to do in here real quick is I'm just going to select this, everything here except the interface, and I'm going to right click and just collapse to function. And I'm going to call that base highlight. And this will make it easier for making children from this. So then I'm just going to go into base highlight real quick. And it already gave us the input for can interact. But I want to take the text from this set text and I want to drop it on here because I want that exposed in this function. And I just want to add a return node to the back here. So we're going to connect return up to both of them. And now we should be done in here. So we're going to compile, save it. And we're going to go back to the interact folder here. So we're all set to make our first item here. So if we want to make an item that's going to be interactable, we're going to make a child from this base interact item. So I'm going to right click, create child, and I'm just going to call this test interact. All right, and I'm just going to use like the default cube or something. So you can obviously use whatever you want. So all we have to do, our mesh is set up, our widget's set up. We just have to tell it what mesh we want to use. So if I click on that, we can come over here now and pick whatever mesh we want. So I'm just going to pick the chamfered cube. And there's the cube. It's going through the ground. So I'm just going to pick it up a little bit. And we're going to go into the event graph now. And we don't need tick or begin overlap. We're going to leave the begin play in because that's using our parent begin play, which is casting and setting up our widget for us. So we're going to leave them. We're just going to come into function here and override. And then I'm going to override the base highlight function. This is what we made in the parent. So I'm going to click that. And what I like doing is just disconnecting that pin, promoting that to a variable. And you can just leave it saying in text. Whatever this says is going to be whatever the widget says. So we can compile that, save it. And then for this, we could just say like, E is my interact button, so I could say E to interact. And you could have this say whatever you want. And what I like doing is just make it instance editable, exposed on spawn. That will come in handy. So then if we go back to our event graph now, we should be all set up to do whatever we want to do here. So I can double click my interact press. So this already has the interface functions from the parent. So we can just double click our interact pressed. And we can just do this, drag off and just do a print. And then we should be good to throw this into the world here and try it. So here's my test interact. So now you can see when I walk up, it's highlighting, the widget's coming on. When I look away, it unhighlights. And if I press E to interact, you can see the print is printing hello. So it is working, it's interacting, it's giving me the text. And if you want to, because we made that interact text exposed, you can click on whatever your item is, and now you have your text right here. So now if I wanted this to say, let's say we wanted to change that to a pickup, I could say press F to pick up. All right, we can disconnect our interact. We can come here and grab the pickup press now. And maybe we want to destroy this to simulate a pickup. So now I can compile, save it. Now we'll be able to walk up and highlight it, press F to pick up. And now we can pick these up, put them in inventory, do whatever, display stuff on the screen. But at this point, we can do whatever we want. If we want to pick it up, interact with it, and whatever we want to do, we have our interact pressed and our pickup pressed here. So we can just put whatever code we need to have happen if we're interacting or picking it up. So the one last thing I want to say about this, which is kind of important and you might run into it, is if you import static meshes into Unreal, whether you originally exported them from Unreal, brought them into Blender, edited them, made them in Blender, or especially if you downloaded them from Quixel, they may not have collision on them. And if you don't have collision on your static mesh, then you won't be able to highlight it. So let me just demonstrate that. I'm going to go into this chamfered cube, and if I open up the static mesh editor, if I just hit this collision drop-down box, you can see how remove collision is here. It'll let me remove it because it has collision. You can also go into show and show simple collision, and you can see the collision box that's around this. So this has collision on it, so it works. If I was to remove this collision, my line trace is not going to hit this, so I can't highlight it. So if you run into that, make sure that you have collision on your static mesh. Doesn't matter what the blueprint's doing. If the static mesh doesn't have collision on it, it's not going to work. So you have to just add some sort of collision, box collision, anything like that. And it doesn't even matter what the collision settings are set to in here. By default, this collision setting is probably set to ignore my line trace. It is. So it doesn't matter what the settings are by default here because we're changing that in the blueprint, but you have to have collision on your static mesh for it to work. So if we put that back on, we should be highlighting again, and we are. So I think that's going to be it for now. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.